This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we've packed a number of shows together to give you some highlights. I know you're going to enjoy the show. Thank you for being with us today.
So as I was preparing for this interview, Ori, I noticed that on the header of your LinkedIn page is this quote: "Courage is going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm," by Winston Churchill. You're in the NFT space, which necessarily is going to bring about some failure. It's definitely been one of the bigger boom bust cycles that we've seen in recent history. Why that quote? What does that quote mean to you? And why do you have that on your LinkedIn header?
It's a really good question. I think that goes very far back, honestly. For example, I grew up in England. I was born in Paris. I moved to Toronto when I was like 17. I didn't necessarily take like the most linear path through life, right? So I've bounced around. I've hit my head against brick walls many times. And the one thing I think it taught me when I got into like a professional environment was failing isn't final, right? Like no matter how many times you screw up, you make a mistake, someone tells you no, you still have the capacity to get back up. And that's your own personal decision to make. Working in the NFT space and having quit a very traditional career in capital markets in order to go into blockchain, we get told we're insane more often than not. And eventually, I think we will be right. I think there's a fundamental way to build this tech. There's a fundamental way to work in an industry that very few understand. And I think that's what the most interesting part of like being an entrepreneur is. So now, like, I'm the founder of my second company now, called On-Chain Listings. And that's a mantra I kind of try to live by. Just failure isn't final.
Yeah, it's one step along the path, right? Life is in many ways an evolution of moving from one thing to the next. You mentioned blockchain, Bitcoin. We're talking here, we're going to be kind of crypto focused and how that crosses over into real estate. But I wonder if we could just run through a couple of terms just to set the baseline at a real high level. You're going to hear us talk about Web3 a lot today for our audience. Could you define Web3, Bitcoin, and blockchain? And I think Bitcoin and blockchain just differentiating, because a lot of times people hear Bitcoin, they think blockchain, and vice versa.
The way I like to separate Bitcoin, blockchain, and even Web3 on a macro level is look at Bitcoin as almost like the equivalent of a security, right? Like when you own an asset, let's say on the stock market or in the real estate market, an equity is a share of a network. It's a percentage of something bigger, and everyone's share is exactly the same. Bitcoin is just a percentage of a network, and you're buying a share of that. And you're buying a share of this macro sentiment towards the blockchain. That's obviously positively correlated to it. When you look at an NFT, it's a unique asset. So let's say the title or deed of ownership to a watch or a home or a painting or anything on those lines. That's what an NFT symbolizes, a unique asset. When you talk about blockchain, blockchain is simply the ledger that moves it across. A token is a duplicate of many different shares. An NFT is a unique asset. And then when you look at what Web3 is it's basically a network or internet kind of tech that allows you to own your own data. And when you put something out there, you can sell it and track it using the blockchain as the ledger for that provenance.
Yeah, and maybe give some real world examples, if you could, of real world ledgers, because that word gets thrown out a lot in cryptocurrency circles and NFTs and all of that. Hey, this is a ledger, and to a lot of, I'll say, normal people, they're like, well, what is this ledger concept? People don't realize that it affects us on a day-to-day basis. So what would be some examples of real world ledgers that we interact with on maybe a daily or an annual basis?
Totally. So the one I'm working on right now is basically land registries, right? So purchasing a property is obviously one of the biggest real markets in the world. Real estate is essentially like deeply decentralized. Every state, for example, in the US has a different land registry. A solution that blockchain could correct in the real world is to create a digital land registry where there's a uniform body that tracks and conducts those transactions on a net kind of ledger. So essentially, it just creates a rule set. So that's something I'm deeply interested in. OCL is trying to correct that industry and create a bunch of fixes for it. But an NFT would have the power to conduct that transaction. And the ledger tracks it, watches the provenance, does the title search on your behalf, checks if there's any liens against the property, for example, allowing users to conduct transactions within a 30-minute window versus a couple weeks, for example. And in the way we conduct traditional transactions as is today, we're spending a ton of time and money on title searches, lien searches, verifying the condition reports on a property, verifying even if the owner that is trying to sell us the house is legit or if it's a title fraud case. By putting all that information on the blockchain, it's now all transparent. It's all been tracked there and it can't be cheated on. It can't be hacked. So by doing so, let's say you come and try to sell your house to me. I can go on the blockchain, or let's say the new equivalent of what an MLS would provide, and I can actually verify that you, Sam, are the owner of this house. You've owned it for 5 years. You bought it at this price from this guy, and I can track all the conditions since then. Versus now, where I have to go find a title lawyer who's going to verify the land registry on my behalf, who I have to pay a few $100 to do that. And then once I want to submit my bid, I have to pay the land registry to get that title and then to conduct the transaction on it. So that's something that NFTs essentially can conduct as is right now. The only issue is, how do we regulate that? And that's something we've been working on.
And I've been hearing about this use case for a while now, maybe 2 or 3 years. I think it was one of the first bigger real world problems that people identified that NFTs could solve. I mean, also sports tickets and some of those types of things. But this is a big issue. Adding transparency to land registries, it's simplifying the title process. That would be phenomenal. It's also very, very challenging because you have so many different stakeholders. You have individual regulation at a state level. And it's a very complicated process with a lot of vested stakeholders and kind of maintaining the status quo. And so to me, it seems like a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. You need some critical mass of people that are demanding that type of system. But how can you get that critical mass of consumers if you don't have the system in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
How are you guys going about solving that problem or trying to address those issues?
So what we've done is so step one is we brought in a title lawyer as a partner. So OCL is composed of 5 founders. One of our founders has a ton of experience dealing with land registries, closing statements, and all the traditional stuff that typically a guy like me wouldn't really know how to deal with. One of the main issues is obviously as you mentioned, there's stakeholders in these transactions. So let's start with like title brokers or real estate brokers and title and escrow lawyers. Those guys typically sit in the middle of most transactions, and they hold most of the keys that are needed to close those transactions. So what we did is we created what's kind of similar to a proof of work protocol, where let's say you list your home for sale. So you list your home for sale on Sotheby's Realty, and now I see it as available for me to submit a bid on. Using blockchain, I can submit my bid, and if you choose to accept it, the title will go into escrow, and my bid will also go into escrow, my deposit amount. And the title lawyer and the real estate broker will now be able to log in and conduct the verification of that transaction. Very similar to what would be done on a Bitcoin transaction in order to verify it, basically by a miner. When those players come into the transaction and they verify it, they provide a digital sign-off, and the title can now flow through, and we can track that on the blockchain and then submit the land registry changes. And by doing so, we can conduct a transaction significantly faster, but also way cheaper, because I'm not paying all those intermediaries for these quote unquote miscellaneous expenses anymore.
Would you anticipate that an ancillary effect of this would be to drop the cost of title insurance because it's going to be easier to ascertain what's on title?
Totally. So that's going to be something we're going to look at. Absolutely. When you look at the insurance, one of the big things is obviously the legitimacy of the title and the condition of the title and so on. If we have a clean digital land registry that's immutable by definition, then when someone submits to you their title, that's, let's say, an NFT or a smart contract, they can't fake it. therefore the insurance on that asset should be significantly cheaper. Those aren't conversations we've started having yet, but it's definitely something we're looking at.
Yeah, that would be a second order effect once you solve the first order problems. So what's it going to take to roll this out? Is it going to take getting an entire state to buy off on this and move that way, entirely, or can a title company be formed that decides, hey, we're going to operate on the chain even if no one else is?
So it actually, the way we're building it and the way I want to make sure people adopt it is actually, I want to make it a back-end solution. I don't want people to actually have to interact with the blockchain actively. And that's been my thesis all along, is I don't think blockchain is something, MetaMask's having to pay gas fees and all this stuff. I don't think people should have to deal with this, especially if you want mass adoption of any kind of technology. So what we've done is it's an API tool. It feeds onto existing platforms. So brokers, title lawyers, and so on will be able to just log in and use the tools of the blockchain to conduct their transactions. All we do is we're just feeding tech into the backend. By doing so, we only need to partner with brokers and really like lawyers and give them access to the tech so that they can put properties for sale through us on their own website. They're just using our API to verify the title. And then when the transaction goes through, the lawyers and the brokers just log in to sign off on it. So it's as minimalistic and back-end focused as possible. And we only make money if the transaction saves money by using us. So we've created a very simple business model that just promotes adoption, really.
So you're currently trying to develop a system that plugs in on the backside and pulls in transactions kind of one at a time. So you're not loading an entire land registry in. You're doing it transaction by transaction, embedding that through the use of NFTs and software in general, that you can drive those title searches faster and complete them more accurately and cheaper, ultimately, for everybody involved.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the goal. Is we start at day one with new titles, ideally, or even older titles where we have to do the back end search. And then over time, we'll start backfilling that information. But step one for us is let's start with new developments or bigger properties that have easy titles to find. And we're also currently looking at a couple economies or countries that don't have clean land registries. And we're looking to pilot OCL in those countries in order to create an original digital registry for them.
Yeah, kind of wipe the slate clean, begin afresh, as it were, and do it right for the 21st century.
And create a new standard. Exactly.
Yeah. What would be a couple of countries that you guys are looking at exploring with the cloudy title process currently?
So one that would be really interesting for us is actually to go into the Ukraine when things clean up, when everything is when infrastructure is in a position to be rebuilt there. The land registries are going to be demolished. There are going to be very few people who are going to actually have the original titles to their homes now. What we would like to do is go in and basically rebuild it for them. Show that we can find whatever historical data there is, recreate it, and then put it on a land registry that can transact way easier. And that's completely transparent to everyone. So that's a big case study for us. We're also looking at different countries in Asia to do this with, Singapore, the Philippines, for example, Thailand. Their land registries have a lot of issues. By using something like this that has uniform rules, that follows a governing body's methodologies, we can clean up a lot.
Yeah. What's one of the biggest objections that you get, and how do you answer it?
Honestly, we don't really get many objections. I think people are afraid of losing their jobs to something that automates their stuff, obviously. Our response to that is honestly quite simple. We're not getting rid of people's jobs or the need for licensing at all, right? And I don't think any platform really serves to do that. Even AI, right? It's not the people losing jobs. It's just you're making their job a lot faster. You're providing them with a tool that allows them to conduct those transactions, and you're just getting rid of a lot of grunt work. So, for example, a title lawyer has to rewrite statements of closing and sale all the time. They probably do multiple a day. Let's say they can conduct 3 a day at this point, right? And they charge, let's say, $2,000 a transaction. If I'm able to create a cookie cutter contract that is a statement of closing and sale that auto-fills with all the variables that the broker already had verified from the title or the land registry. And then all the lawyer has to do is log in, verify, make sure everything's up to date, and sign off. I'm giving the lawyers the tools to conduct 20 transactions in a day at a fraction of the pace or at a fraction of the time spent versus limiting themselves to 3 a day. So fine, they charge less per transaction, but they're conducting 4 to 5 times more. It's not that we're taking the fishing rod away from the fishermen, we're just giving them a way stronger one.
No. So it makes sense to me if you can get title moved onto a blockchain, into a ledger, a digital ledger, that from then on, everything is much faster, much quicker. I mean, by an exponential factor. But bridging the gap from where we are today to the first time that title hits the ledger, that seems to me to be a really crucial step. And the hardest piece of it all, because it, at least in theory, as I'm thinking about it, it's going to require the highest level of accuracy and your transitioning systems. And so how your business model seems to be predicated on the fact that you can make that transition on an individual title basis cleaner, smoother than a regular transaction leaving title in the antiquated system. Am I thinking through that correctly? And how are you guys solving for those problems that'll occur in transitioning from one system to another?
Mm-hmm. So step one is the way we've designed it is we're not stepping on the existing system's toes. We're creating something that can mirror it and conduct side by side to it without replacing one or the other. Right now, it's just an elegant way that's a little bit cheaper, and we conduct the closing on your behalf. Longer term, what our goal is that it becomes like the gold standard or the preferred party to conduct these transactions, in which case we can start backfilling a lot more information. My goal is that we create something that's not invasive. Our biggest hurdle right now is VCs and institutional money are very reluctant to invest in anything that has blockchain on it. That's been like the biggest pain in being an entrepreneur in this space. But we found fantastic partners. We have really, really good co-founders. We've found friends and family who were willing to fund it. And as a result, we managed to go patented very early. We managed to get a bunch of pilot projects ready to go. So yes, the blockchain space took a massive hit. Adoption is not going to be simple, but we've created a tool that is as simple, elegant, and non-invasive as possible. So I think if we execute this correctly, we have something that could be revolutionary to like prop tech.
Yeah. And what do you think that window is? There was a lot of promises made. I'll go back to like 2019 when the latest round of cryptomania kind of took hold and everything proliferated, right? It was no longer just BTC and Ethereum, but hey, there's all these different things and CryptoPunks and rocks and all these different things hit the zeitgeist. And then it all kind of washed away, or not all of it, but a lot of the hype washed away in 2022. Where are we at in the building cycle?
So we just got our patents approved a couple of weeks ago. We're already in like very early stage developments now. We're basically closing funding for the final version of the product. I would say the first transactions can expect to be seen in 6 to 8 months, and we've got pilots ready to start taking it on. So we're in pretty good form for that. There are many players out there who've stated they can conduct transactions on chain. And some of my partners and myself were part of that wave, and we saw a lot of this stuff happening very early on. Essentially what people were doing, which is really funny, is they were just making shell companies tied to the NFT, and they were transacting that NFT. So shell company holding house 123 was able to move using the smart contract. But that wasn't a title transfer. That wasn't a land registry check. None of these components were a part of that process. So it never saved anyone money. We've created a product that's much more complicated, much more expensive to build, and it will take a bit longer to get to market. But because of that, I think it's got much more capacity for innovation.
Yeah. When you guys launch to market and you're ready for those first transactions in 6 months, what's your target market immediately? I mean, there's a ton of different types of transactions that happen within land registries. I would imagine that you've identified a segment or two that are most favorable for being flipped for one reason or another. Which are those?
Mm-hmm. So we're focusing on new construction residential. we're starting in Florida. We're doing the US as our primary target right now in terms of like mass market. So we're starting with Florida, then we'll work our way into Colorado, and then most likely Texas. Once those states are done, then we'll look at what's the easiest to adopt next. Because essentially what we have is a smart contract that just needs to be tweaked based off of the regulatory body. So we just need to figure out what makes the most sense and what's the most cost effective for us to do.
And new construction, I would imagine, because you can sell a developer on this concept and potentially have hundreds of transactions with the same counterparty on one side. And then Florida, Texas, and Colorado, because those states are relatively crypto friendly in their legislation, or smart contract friendly, maybe would be a better way to put it.
Yeah, that would be basically the benefit. Is also with new construction, all the titles are clean, right? The new construction building has an original plot that was on the registry, and then that was split up into however hundreds of units. So it makes it a lot easier for us to create clean titles based off of that versus backdating a 100-year-old home and finding out every owner along the way. So that's the cleanest way to start a new title.
Depending on how educated someone is, you're going to get a lot of different, hurdles, or they'll perceive a lot of different risks. So there's people that would say, hey, the problem with the digital ledger is if you just unplug it, where's it going to live? And I think that's among the more ignorant. But when you look out at the landscape, what risk do you think is actually the biggest risk to this entire space taking off?
I think the biggest risk is obviously going to be regulatory. If regulators shut us down and tell us we don't want to see this happening, or we don't want transactions occurring like this, then we've got issues. But we have been really careful the way we've designed it so that it essentially conducts a transaction the same way it happens today, just through portals versus through paper and email. So that's a risk. Obviously, the second risk is going to be adoption if people are going to be willing to give this a shot. We don't think that's going to be an issue because we're saving everyone money, and we're giving royalties to our partners for letting us do that. So we're really treating people as partners, as friends and family. Like the way we work with people, like you'll see when you meet my partners, like we all work with people as if they are our relatives and we've known them for our whole lives. So we really work based off of trust and mutual benefit. We're not trying to sell people in some form of a scam. We've all been in blockchain since relatively early. We've seen those guys playing these games, and that's definitely not what interests us.
What do you think the adoption curve looks like? Maybe like an optimistic and a pessimistic view. You're in the building side. You obviously are optimistic about the space as a whole, or you wouldn't be here. But if you guys are 6 to 8 months away from rolling out your first transactions, when will it be a real verifiable option for the majority of folks to use a service like this in their area?
Within the first year, we're hoping to be generating revenue to actually prove that we can conduct transactions on a mass scale. I think once we announce one of our lead partnerships, I think there will be obviously like a fad of adoption because it will become a much more credible tool and it'll be a lot cheaper. And then we'll see. I think tech goes through waves. There's always going to be hurdles. There's definitely going to be regulatory hurdles for us to overcome. As is, I think give us a year and you'll start seeing transactions occurring on chain. Say within 5 years, you'll start seeing regulators adopt it. And if regulators start to adopt it and land registries start to get digitized, then it'll be everything. Then it'll be all real estate transactions will be occurring using a digital ledger. And then suddenly real estate becomes like prop tech and real estate just become one, and everything is occurring using the net. And that's when I think it becomes really fascinating.
Yeah. Now you're talking about a lot of bureaucracy in there as well. And historically, anything with that level of bureaucracy is one of the slowest to adopt new technology of any sort, let alone something as cutting edge as blockchain. So when you look at that point of mass adoption, are we 5 years away, 10 years away, 15 years away? What do you think?
It's at least 5 years before it even gets looked at on that scale. But the benefit is when you're looking at like closing statements, for example, you have these miscellaneous legal fees, title search fees. They add up to, let's say, $2,000 a transaction. We can cut that down by close to 50%. But when you start talking about title searches, lien searches, when you start talking about the land registry and cleaning all that up, you're talking about impacts on transactions between $10,000 to $20,000 in the US. So there's a massive, massive opportunity there to save people money and literally lower the barrier of entry into real estate. So there's a huge benefit, and there's socioeconomic impact is actually quite big on this. Let alone the fact that you like eradicate the need for paper in a transaction now. So there are more than enough incentives to push for something like this to work. If the US is not the first to adopt it and we still have to like take baby steps there, we're going to go into other economies that are going to be willing to help us adopt it. And if that means we go into the Ukraine as a post-war effort and we try to recreate their land registry, we'll do that. And the same thing with Asia, same thing with North America. We'll do it pretty much anywhere we can, but coming in from the top and from a regulatory level.
Well, Ori, fascinating conversation. I'm looking forward to tracking this space as builders like yourself continue to iterate, continue to drive innovation forward.
You had a post a little while back on LinkedIn where you talked about how you turn your cell phone off for 25 hours a week.
Okay, sure.
For a lot of people, that'd be like cutting off their right arm and putting it on the counter and not being able to use it. What's the genesis of that, and how has that been beneficial in your life in achieving that work-life balance?
Sure. So I'm a religious Orthodox Jew. Grew up that way. For me, every Saturday was a Sabbath that we disconnected to reconnect. So I grew up with it. So obviously it's a lot easier than someone that hasn't experienced it. From sundown Friday until Saturday evening for about 25 hours, we don't get in the car. We don't turn on electricity. We make sure everything is set up before. We use a crock pot to warm up something for Saturday to have hot food. We do things in advance to prepare for it. Another thing we do, obviously, like I discussed, was that we turn off our phones. We're not in communication with the greater world. We spend time with our family and with our communities. And honestly, it's not easy. But when I made that post, I recommended it. A few people told me they're going to try it. And I actually have a pretty cool story for you. One of our brokers in Indiana, she told me that before COVID, she was trying this where she wouldn't work on Saturday just as a way to spend time with her family. I sent her this video about turning off my phone. And she got back to me a week later and said, Daniel, I just want to let you know this past Saturday, I decided I'm not going to work. I spent time reading and just talking and chatting with my 12-year-old. And he said, Mom, I forgot how nice it was to spend time with you. So I definitely would highly recommend it. And obviously I do it from a religious perspective, but it could be done. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be done by anyone that wants to try it and just disconnect, reconnect, even for a few hours at a time, just to really spend quality time with their family. I would highly recommend it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of folks that struggle with compulsive behaviors, particularly around technology. So totally understand that you're doing this for religious reasons, but have you found that regular cadence of just not being with technology for that 24-hour period has allowed you to have more control over technology in the other 6 days of the week and use it maybe in a more purpose-driven way?
Yes, for sure. I mean, the fact that we were forced to turn things off, it allows you to recalibrate. Every Friday evening when I'm sitting at the Sabbath dinner, my family likes to go over what our goals are for the next week and talk about what we're grateful for. And that definitely helps us reset. But I also try as much as possible when I do come home from a busy day to put away my phone, not to be busy with things. Emails can wait. LinkedIn can wait. My family is important. So I feel that 25-hour period definitely helps recalibrate your week and allows you to really reset. Definitely.
Appreciate you elaborating on that. What does keep you busy is multifamily acquisitions. You have a background there. You've been doing that for a long period of time, and obviously at Lightwater for the last year or so. Maybe just sketch your firm's thesis, where you guys are buying, what kind of assets you're buying, and we'll kind of start drilling down on some multifamily stuff for the audience here.
Sure. So Lightwater Capital started in 2019. They have a separate division that started in 2007 called J. Watson & Co., which manages New York properties, which is still in existence, managing about 3,000 units in the 5 boroughs of New York. In 2019, the rent laws changed and made it quite difficult to be profitable with any properties in New York. And they decided, Joe Wasser and Mayor Free, the two principals of the company, decided to start Lightwater Capital to invest out of state. They spent about the next 7 or 8 months researching different markets. And they finally landed on Atlanta, Georgia as a market they wanted to start with. They bought 2 deals there in the beginning of COVID in 2020, which they since sold in 2022 for a really nice return to our investors in a short 2-year time period. And since then, we've picked up 6 properties. One of them, which I was involved in the acquisitions role. The other 5 were from before I joined the company. And now I'm involved in the asset management of those 6 properties, totaling about 1,300 units. Since then, we've added, I should say, a focus on the Indianapolis market, the Midwest. We really like that market. We picked up a $72 million portfolio there last year in June of 2022, and we've never looked back. In January of 2023, we picked up another property, and we just closed, thank God, last week on two deals in Indianapolis as well. So we have about 1,200 or 1,300 units there as well. And we have one small deal in Savannah. We typically target value add workforce housing type of multifamily, lighter value add, something that's already existing cash flow that we have opportunities to bring it to the next level, to maybe take some of the long-term ownership that hasn't really pushed the rent or hasn't really renovated the units. We'll come in, do strategic renovations. We'll add or improve the amenities. We'll do light upgrades to the units, and we'll try to bring down our expenses as much as possible to really maximize the profitability of the properties.
Yeah. So Atlanta and Indianapolis, those are 2 markets that you don't see paired very often, especially as like the 2 primary targets of a firm. Atlanta, our audience is probably a little bit more familiar with the macro drivers there, big city, Southeast, manufacturing, population growth, all those things. But Indianapolis, Midwest, a little bit slower rate of growth than Atlanta. What attracted you guys there? I like the strategy. We also are working on some Midwest markets, so I understand it, but I'd be curious for you to elaborate on what drew you guys specifically to Indianapolis.
Sure. So Indianapolis we felt was an interesting market. The first thing that our firm we're based in New York and New Jersey. The first thing we always look at for an investment is, can we get in and out same day? Because we asset manage and we like to be at the properties at least once a month, if not once a week, depending on the property. We like to know that we can get in and out. We all have families at home. We're not looking to spend 2, 3, 4 days away. So we like to get in and out. So Indianapolis checked the box in the sense of being able to fly in it. Number one. Number two, what we like about Indianapolis is it's kind of the central portion of the Midwest. It doesn't have it's very landlord friendly, it's tax friendly. It's not a boomer bust in the sense, it's not like an Austin or a Phoenix or certain markets that went crazy during the pandemic and now have been, cooled off significantly. We found that it's a steady eddy where average rents were probably $800-900 when market rents across the nation are probably $1,300, $1,400, $1,500. We felt there was a lot of room. And we went down. We like the fact that it's easy to get to and there's good demographics and there's tons of logistics. And it's I saw a statistic, it's within a day or a 24-hour drive for truck drivers to get to anywhere in the country. So it really provides an affordable place and with a lot of jobs and a lot of growth in a steady type of growth versus maybe a market that's seen 20+% rent growth and now it's seeing negative rent growth. So that's what we really like about Indiana.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I was on your website browsing through your portfolio and you've got a lot of 60s, 70s, you've got a few 80s, you've got a 90s deal, you've even got a 2021 deal. So you've bought across the spectrum. You mentioned that you focus a lot on value add, but what has led you to some of those newer deals as well?
So it's interesting. The newer deal in Savannah, a group had it under contract for a few months and came to us. We met at a conference and they said, hey, we need about $5 or $6 million of equity. We'd love to partner with you. We happened to be at that deal. We had a 1031 need. So it made sense for us to place equity. And we've always wanted to get into newer deals. But I would say most of the A-, B+ deals don't provide the same type of returns as the heavier or the value add Class C type properties. This particular property was very interesting because it was built by the original developer and was being sold by the developer. And his average rents were about $1,300 and the market rent was closer to $1,700 to $1,800. So we felt that it was a great second generation lease play. We said, hey, let's test the waters because obviously we'd love to do newer and nicer assets, especially in today's market. But we haven't been able to find deals that have penciled that have worked. And this particular deal made a lot of sense. It was a smaller asset. It's only 104 units. Our typical deals are 150+ units. So it was a little smaller in a new market that we've heard great things about. And most people will tell you that Savannah is a great market. And thank God it was a good way for us to test the waters on a smaller deal and new construction. Our CapEx budget was much less than what we typically would do in our CapEx budget. And so far we've had a lot of success in that.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. So asset management, really crucial, often overlooked portion of what we do in multifamily business, particularly from a retail investors. I think sometimes retail investors can get this idea that, oh, if we just invest, then we're completely passive. And 5 years later, we sell and the property does well and we all make money. And there's a lot that goes between closing on the property and selling it on the back end. And
Yes.
that's where the general partnership and their experience really makes the difference. What's your role in that process at Lightwater Capital? And what are a few things that you really enjoy about being involved on the asset management side?
Sure. So I oversee the general oversight of the asset management across the portfolio. Once a month, we'll go through I'll do the monthly reporting to see how the assets performing and give an update internally. In Atlanta, particularly the last few months, I've really jumped in on operations to really be on top of any collections or evictions that are needed. Any rental assistance programs, I've really been able to succeed in getting a lot of our residents much needed back rent that have had a hard time paying since COVID and getting them back on their feet. But what I really enjoy is really seeing the properties improve. I would say over the last few months, we've definitely seen an improvement in our occupancy. One of the things that I've done is that maybe, I don't know if it's so much asset management or management, but I've gone down and we have 1,300 units in Atlanta, and we have some properties that have a few more vacancies than others. I've gone through most of the vacant units. And the reason why I did that was because I saw that it was units, instead of being turned quickly, were taking a little longer. Some of them had reasons for it. Maybe they need a little more work. A lot of them just weren't getting the proper oversight. And I decided to jump in and say, you know what, I'm going to go in and I'm going to, they say trust but verify. I wanted to see, where is the unit holding and how much time does it need? And many of the units I found, to my surprise, that were vacant for a little longer than they should have been, didn't need that much. And that little extra push helped our management company realize, like, hey, we need to be moving these along in a quicker fashion. So that's just one component. Another thing I do is I always look at any other income. So we recently implemented across the board in our Atlanta portfolio. We started using Jetty as a way to help a win-win to the residents, to help them move in without a security deposit. At the same time, it allows us to get more than maybe a half month or a month's rent. We're able to push even close to 2 months rent by having the resident paying a monthly fee. We've also implemented a renter's insurance program. We've done many different things to improve the ancillary and other income, as well as try to bring down some expenses as well. We did low flow toilets. We've used a company based in Ohio that does our low flow toilets. We've done that at most of our properties. We had one property with some leaks. We had our property manager go building by building and check every unit and every fixture to make sure there's nothing leaking. And we brought down our water bills by a good 30 to 40%. So we're very proactive from behind the scenes, and also boots on the ground. We have no problem going there, knocking on doors, making our suggestions to our management company and having them improve. So we definitely see an improvement with that asset management.
Yeah. So Lightwater Capital started as a property management firm in New York, which I think is one of the toughest places to property manage in the world. And that's even before some of the more recent regulation that made it, I would say, almost impossible to manage properties there.
Right.
But it sounds like you guys are third-party managing in your remote markets. Is that correct?
Correct. And the reason why we did that is because we really wanted to scale. When we started Lightwater Capital, the focus was we still have our New York management company. That's kind of the full day-to-day focus. But we want to scale and be able to really pick up a few thousand units out of state. And we felt that if we're going to do our own management, we felt that it's just going to maybe slow us down from doing more acquisitions. But we really have a good partnership with our management company. Our management companies, we speak to them obviously once a week on a call, but we're also in touch with the property managers. We'll go down once a week or once a month, depending on the property. So we have a good relationship with them that even though they're the management company, we're directly involved in asset management, and we're able to help dictate the profitability of the properties.
Yeah, you're actively involved. Is it the same third-party manager in Atlanta and in Indianapolis?
It's actually, we have 3 different management companies, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. That's part of the scaling process, is solving for property management. And I know there's groups like us that have gone in-house, and there's advantages to that. But on the flip side, like you just alluded to, if you keep that third party and you do have that rigorous asset management piece, it allows you to focus more of the time inside your capital organization on moving the ball forward as far as acquisitions, and can lead to scaling much faster.
Right. A few months ago, I was actually on a panel at the IMN conference in Miami, And I really would have rather have been on something with acquisitions, but the only option they had was in-house management versus third-party management. So I said, sure, I don't mind being on that panel. I prepared all the questions. The problem was that the moderator decided to ask completely different questions. It was a very interesting, so that was on the cuff, which was fine. It was definitely very interesting to hear. There were some people that manage themselves, and some people that were third-party management companies. So it was interesting to hear each one's perspective. And then there was us that we use third-party management, but we asset manage. So kind of the blend of the two.
Yeah. So switching gears from asset management more towards acquisitions, Daniel, multifamily transaction volume is down significantly from 2021 to 2023, even last year to this year, significant changes. And yet you guys are still getting deals done. Where do you see opportunities in today's marketplace with the higher interest rates and maybe a little bit of a wider spread in the bid ask gap? How are you guys getting deals done?
Sure. So I'll give you one case study, for example. We closed a deal in Indianapolis about 6 months called the Sycamore's Apartments. It's a 210 unit deal. The original asking price was close to 30 million. By the time the broker brought it to the table, they said it's probably going to be 27 million. We said, no, we're only at 24 million. In the end, they came back to us and said, are you still, a few months later, are you still at 24 million? We said, no, I'm sorry, with today's market, because that was when the rates were going up and up. We said, oh, we're only at 22 million. And at the end of the day, I guess the seller, if they're in a position that they need to sell or have to sell, that's obviously the best opportunity. And we were able to get that opportunity where we got the deal down to about 21 to $22 million, which is exactly where we needed it to be, which is north of a 6 cap, which is how we're doing all our deals now, north of a 6 cap. And our theory is if we can make the deals pencil in today's market and hold on to it and either refi or sell within 3 to 5 years, when hopefully the debt markets will come down. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. It's anybody's guess, but hopefully, obviously it hasn't happened yet, but hopefully if you're able to hold on for 3-4 years with fixed financing and not deal with recap and with floating debt, if you could make a deal pencil in today's market and get it, let's say north of a 6 cap, and you get financing around the same, so you don't come in day one with negative leverage, then you should be great if the market goes down, if rates go down to 4.5%, 5%. And especially since we're building it out to get north of an 8 cap in our year 5 projection. So we're the way we're doing is we used to look at deals and say, okay, if it's 4.5 or let's say it's a 5 cap, we have to build it out. That's 7 cap. Now we're looking at it that it's 6 cap. We're building it out north of an 8 cap. And our hopes are obviously that the rates do come down. And we're not underwriting it that way, because that would be probably reckless to do that. But instead we're actually just saying, okay, even if the rates don't come down, let's stress test it. If let's say the rate is at 6%, this is what it'll look like. If it's at 5.5%, this is what an exit would look like. So we're just looking at deals obviously more carefully, and we're still finding opportunities because the people that need to sell we found that finally starting to come meet the market. And we're only offering on deals that we feel we're only offering at pricing that we feel comfortable at versus maybe a year and a half ago when it was, if you were $1 million or $2 million off, don't even bother bidding. There's going to be 50 other offers. Markets have definitely changed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely more of a buyer's market. I think sellers are still adjusting to the reality of what current dynamics are. You mentioned debt. That's obviously a crucial piece of this. That's anywhere from 50 to 70% of your capital stack. What kind of debt are you placing on your properties today? Are you going fixed rate? Are you going floaters? Are you going longer term, shorter term?
So primarily we're looking at all our deals with fixed rate financing. That's how we're looking at our deals. It happens to be that one of the deals we closed recently was a heavy value add that was right next door to our best performing property in Indianapolis. So it was only about 40% occupied, but it was due to a major oversight, a major lack, I should say, of oversight in management, where they just, dropped the ball. They weren't putting any funds into the deal. And we went there thinking it needed a crazy amount of CapEx, and really it needed a lot less CapEx, still needed a decent amount. So that particular deal, we had to go with bridge financing, obviously, just because it wasn't stable. But primarily all other deals that we're looking at is fixed financing. I believe we're doing the Fannie 5-year program, which allows you to step down after 3 years. So we're not looking to lock in long-term debt at 7 to 10 plus years, because we don't want to be left holding the bag. I remember looking at deals at my previous company in 2020. I was with a different group called Ori Legacy Group. And I remember looking at deals that the rates then were probably 2.5 to 3%. Oh, but you have to assume the loan for 2018 at a 4.5%. And I remember thinking, no way, 2018, those guys get left holding the bag. Now it looks great. If a guy who had a loan 4.5%, people will take it all day. So we don't want to end up that we lock in a loan that's at 6.5% for 10 years. And then when the rates come down, we're kind of stuck holding back. So we're looking, we do, but we also obviously want to be conservative and make sure that we don't rush it, say, oh, that it's going to be a short-term refi. So we are taking, for most of our deals, fixed at 5 years with the option of refinancing after 3 years.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.